So I guess we are on. Afternoon, everyone. My name's Daley Tipton. I'm the moderator for the AmTrust title. It's Sustainable Building and webinar this afternoon. With me is Bomi Jung and Allison Novak. We are very excited to be here. We do want to thank AmTrust for sponsoring this event and sponsoring the conversation. We're going to do a little bit of introductions and then go into the conversation. It'll be very, very conversational, and we'll try to have some fun with it and give everybody some good information. But just real quick, I'll introduce myself first. Daley Tipton. I work for Evolution Energy Partners. I've spent about 25 years plus. I don't like to date myself. I'm getting old. In the sustainability and energy management field. Focusing mainly on helping businesses run better and more sustainable, and ultimately saving money with that. Today at Evolution Energy Partners, I lead a team and work with customers in order to save money through sustainable initiatives, specifically focused around decreasing their operational spend around energy management, energy efficiency projects, and sustainability projects, driving down costs and increasing their sustainable footprint. So with me today are my two colleagues. I'd like Bomi to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Bomi Jung. Nice to be here. Thank you very much. I started working on climate about 17 years ago, and I've been working at the intersection of affordable housing and climate change for the past 14 years, most recently at the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA, which is the largest owner of rental apartments in North America. And so at NYCHA, starting with an $18 million construction program, I grew the climate program to about $1 billion, starting with a 10-year strategic sustainability plan. And some of the highlights of that work include the country's largest residential energy performance contracts, the state's largest weatherization client, the first passive house project being undertaken by NYCHA right now, a 25 megawatt solar program. And last year I led the first large scale heating and hot water electrification conversion program in the city of New York. And I'm proud to say that with the 2050 roadmap in hand, NYCHA intends to eschew fossil fuels and embrace electrification for future capital projects whenever they can. So I left NYCHA in April to find new ways to engage with climate transition. And there's certainly a lot to do at this very critical moment. We have about 10 years, as I'm sure everyone has heard, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Residential and commercial buildings are directly and indirectly responsible for about up to 1 billion metric tons of carbon per year, or about 12 to 20% nationally, depending on what you're counting. And in places like New York City, that share is greater than 70%. So there's certainly a lot to do, a lot of excitement at this moment, and I'm happy to be here with y'all today to discuss this important topic.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Allison, would you give us an introduction of yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm Allison Novak. I am the head of Sidewalk Urban Development at Sidewalk Labs. I joined Sidewalk Labs about 6 months ago. Prior to that, I spent 15 years as a real estate developer in New York City. The company that I joined when I first came on board told me that they don't really do green buildings, they just do good buildings, and that green was sort of a frilly thing that people, the young folk wanted to do. And in the time that I spent there, really pushed the company to broaden its perspective and took them through their first LEED projects, which ended up LEED Platinum, took them through their first green enterprise communities, NYSERDA programs. We set a number of different records and then broke them, including for the largest solar array on residential buildings, for the largest passive house building in the world. So by the time I left, the company really sees itself as a green developer, and I'm very proud of that. In that history, really learned about the pain points of from the development side, whether it's the upfront costs, whether it's the operational costs over the long term, and saw the impact that different frameworks, whether they were from the USGBC, a nonprofit, or from public policy, had in terms of impact on our work. And came to Sidewalk Labs because I was really excited about its mission to improve urban cities, urban locations, urban developments for everyone. At Sidewalk Labs, we're really focused on these interlocking areas of importance, which are sustainability in terms of climate change, growing towards being climate positive, and inclusive, equitable development, understanding that we don't have to sacrifice one for the other, but they really need to go hand in hand.
Excellent. Well, I am very excited. I feel humbled when I hear all these grand projects you guys talk about. I want to kind of move into that. In my practice, and what I do is we talk to developers, owners, operators of buildings, and we generally start with one building, and then we grow from there, right? And I feel like I'm eating an elephant one bite at a time, right? And we do our ASHA Level 2 audit. We bring the ECMs to forefront. We define the ROI, the greenhouse gas reduction. And Bomi, I hear you talk about this master planning and the large scale. How does that connect with the with the guy who's got one building? Where's talk to me about the master planning?
Sure. For me?
Yes, Bomi, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think that strategic capital planning is really important, specifically because of the fact that we have multiple really big macro issues happening, right? One is that in recognition of the climate emergency, policies are changing. So New York is one of, at this point, I believe, 5 jurisdictions that set specific carbon emission limits for buildings, and there will certainly be more. Building codes are changing. We're adopting step codes and stretch codes. I mean, there's just the policy frameworks are changing. And then, the other issue aside from regulatory is that we're experiencing the impacts of climate change even today. And so even though we talk about this really critical 10-year period, that's not 10-year period to avoid climate change. That boat has sailed. This is 10-year period to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And so the things that we know that we're already going to have to deal with are things like increased heat waves and other heat-related emergencies. So whether it's high heat days or whether it's extended periods, the prevalence of tidal flooding and coastal flooding and such. And so we know that these things are coming fairly soon within the grand scheme of capital planning. We don't talk about things in a year or two, right? We do capital planning for 3, 5, 10, 20 years out. And so within the range of the capital planning that we're doing today, we're talking about having to deal with all of these uncertainties, the regulatory uncertainties, the actual impact uncertainties. And so, yeah, absolutely, you got to eat that elephant one building at a time. And NYCHA, had to do that one building at a time. We just happen to have a lot of them. We had 2,600 buildings to do, but everyone has to do it one building at a time. But if ever there was a moment to plan ahead to avoid duplicative investments that that you'll have to reinvest in a building that you didn't plan to or whatever. I mean, that time is now. We really need to be doing capital planning today.
Allison, chime in on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Bomi, you experienced some of the results of sort of climate change and stronger storms firsthand with Superstorm Sandy and its impact on different components of the NYCHA portfolio. And I certainly experienced those with buildings of my own during that particular storm, with flooding and such. I did Sidewalk Labs within our advisory business. So at Sidewalk Labs, we have sort of 3 different things happening in quick sum, which is our product solutions, which are tailored to particular pain points or areas. Then we have our advisory services business, which I lead, in our co-development business, which we're embarking on now, which I will also oversee. And within the advisory business, a lot of our clients are coming to us with large master plans, and it can be small, a couple acres, but more frequently we're seeing clients in the Sun Belt who have 100 acres, 200 acres, 300 acres. And they're asking themselves, how can I make this project as sustainable as possible? How can I be net carbon? How can I plan for future storms and build in resiliency? And I think it's a really interesting approach because they're not, they have to design it. When you're doing a master plan, you have to kind of look at the broad overview. You have to understand how the different pieces fit together. And you build it maybe 1, maybe 3 buildings at a time. You're not building 300 acres at a time. But certainly, like, the most important thing I think that we've tried to impress upon our clients, and that I even if you even take one building and thinking about it sort of from a sort of sustainability lens, is that everyone has to be on the same page from the moment you kick off talking about the project. So if you want to do district energy, you have to think about like what are going to be the programs in this particular master plan. Are we going to have a data center? Can we use the excess heat from that? Is it going to be mostly a residential project? So I think all of those sort of considerations that go into figuring out how you can leverage different aspects of your planning so that you're putting together a really smart upfront capital plan and something that you could operate over the longer term is really key.
Excellent. When we talk about, actual things happening, and I run into it a lot, and have had a lot of conversations where we're looking with customers, and the customers are saying, "Hey, look, I can get my building to this point with my current technology," and there's going to have to be something where efficiency is going to have to increase in order to take me to the next level. What are the thoughts there? Where are we today? And what are your expectations for the future? Either one of you can chime in, but for me, it's a challenge. We come back with energy conservation measures for a portfolio of CRE customers, and tell them you can take this much out, and then the next level's this just quantum leap, that the pricing, the cost, and the payback. And I know the level of investment has to be there because we have this the climate emergency is there, but I hear all the time, green is green, and when it's green, and it has to pay for itself. So tell me your thoughts there. Who would like to jump in?
Well, I would love to start and then turn it over to Bomi, particularly on sort of the ROI aspect of it. But I would sort of categorize this into 3 buckets. The first one would be that doing green when you're starting from scratch is actually pretty easy. And we overlook too often the low-hanging fruit, like good air sealing between apartments, good energy efficiency from the ground up. The things that don't really have that much of a cost premium or no cost premium, and sort of this presumption that anything you do that's green is going to be way more expensive, I think is just patently sort of false and is problematic, and we need to get rid of that. The second thing is that there are some really interesting technologies, some of which can leapfrog us over the existing technologies. Will make things that we're doing better. Sensors are getting better. So it's not that we didn't have thermostats before, but now we have thermostats we can control from anywhere. So there are some of these technologies and changes that will make it easier to do things that we want to do. The third thing is innovative technology that doesn't come in like a box with like an outlet and a plug, but is enabling us to build greener, lower embodied carbon development. So in particular, I'm thinking of mass timber being much lower in embodied carbon than the other construction types that we have today. And you see it much more frequently in Europe and other parts of the country, Australia, other parts of the world, Australia, and so on and so forth. And it's growing more in the United States. I think that, for us at Sidewalk Labs, one of the things that we've been working on for a number of years and hope to have some more announcements about as 2021 progresses, but to have this sort of kit of parts or modular design of mass timber that utilizes some of the thinking from digital fabrication, from jet engines, from the automobile industry, to be able to cut sort of what I kind of call, to the chagrin of some of my colleagues, like Lego pieces that can be customizable, driven to a site, flat packed to a truck, and erected on site, which is a much different thing than poured in place concrete or steel in terms of sort of its extraction and manufacturing process. So the technology that's really the unlock is what's happening in the factory more so than it's what's happening in the field, but it's making the whole sort of process and life cycle of that construction technique more sustainable. But in some of I think this is where I want to transition over to Bomi's thoughts on this. But I think one of the questions that I just heard even the other day on a podcast about mass timber is, oh, but will it be a lot less expensive? And I think that speaker in particular was saying, well, it might not be that much less expensive, maybe it'll be a lot faster to erect, and that, you know, has certain operational savings, but also here are all the other benefits of doing that. Here's some of its sort of natural fire retardation. Here's some of its, you know, other really keen attributes for energy efficiency that we should pay attention to and try to value that into it.
Omi, comments?
Yeah, so I love hearing a developer say like it doesn't cost more, right? Because that's exactly what you want to hear from folks who are doing development. I think that certainly is. I don't think it's at all controversial to say that, for example, passive house new construction in multifamily, for example, absolutely does not cost more, right? I think everyone has agreed at that, to the extent that, you know, there may be an incremental cost on your first project that's associated with various sort of, you know, first time hurdles, right? So maybe you have some, you know, some redesigns or some callbacks or some material that you haven't used before, but that, you know, your second, third, fourth projects, or you're going to bring it in the same price as all of your other projects. And so I think that's really important to know. Yeah.
Passive house, making sure that everybody that's listening understands what passive house is, because I want to, can you just define real quick passive house for us?
Yeah, sure. So passive house. Oh, so I guess I have a disclaimer. I serve on the board of New York Passive House, which is an organization.
That's fine. And I know what it is, but I would hate to be somebody in the audience, because we've said it twice now, and I'm like, hate to be somebody in the audience going, "What's passive?" You know, and afraid to ask the question in the chat. He doesn't know what that is. Oh my God.
Well, so passive house is I guess a labeled system for building. Designing and building buildings to a specific energy performance criteria. And on the one hand, it is a labeling system, sort of like LEED. There is a certification associated with it. But the main part that I think you have to take away from the value of passive house is that it's really a toolkit to do quality control. And so, for example, Allison was talking about how, you know, it doesn't cost you anymore to air seal the way that you're supposed to air seal according to the fire code. But the fire code doesn't tell you to then test it, right? And so what passive house does is essentially says, well, these are things that you're supposed to be doing probably to code anyway, but we're actually now going to test it for air tightness. And so it gives you specific tools, specific targets. And so it's really a way of, you know, making sure that you're doing quality assurance as you're designing and as you're constructing. And I think that is the value add, much more than just the simple labeling aspect of it. And so,
retrofits? What about when you're looking at retrofits? Because we're not always building new buildings.
Absolutely. Yeah, retrofits are definitely the big hurdle, right? Because these are buildings that exist and they're going to continue to exist, and they were built at all different times with all different kinds of technology. First of all, it is absolutely possible to get an existing building to passive house. And there are a number of tools that are available to help you do that as well. I think that whether you can do that at the same cost that you can, for example, a new construction that definitely has not been answered definitively one way or the other, but it would make sense that it wouldn't be as cheap, if for no other reason than if you're doing occupied rehabs, for example, just the fact of having occupied rehabs is itself a cost and a hurdle, right? But so I think this is where we look to government to help us figure this out, whether it's through program innovations like NYSERDA's Retrofit New York program. So NYSERDA is the energy subsidy agency, if you will, in New York State. They have a program that's specifically trying to bring down the cost of high performance retrofits, and so they're funding a lot of innovation. But the other way that you can use government to move this kind of market is what NYCHA has been trying to do, which is to use government portfolios, so whether they're commercial portfolios or residential portfolios, to try and get this work done, so that to the extent that we're paying more to do this kind of work, we're paying for it more on the government's dime, if you will, while we figure out how all of these things fit together. And then I also think that in the context of retrofits, you have to look at it from a public policy perspective and say, what we're asking developers to do is to internalize a bunch of formerly externalized costs, right? And if you're asking folks to internalize these costs into decisions that they now have to carry, in their performance, I think it makes perfect sense to say, we should be using government, or we should be using public resources to make those pro formas work. And so I think when you step back and look at it from a public policy perspective, I know that some folks are reluctant to, to go and participate in government programs if they haven't been doing that already. But, think about it as, government just told you that you now have to internalize essentially some sort of cost of carbon. And now, not for your building's direct benefit necessarily, but in aggregate to benefit the city. So, to the extent that there are opportunities to make resources available, then they should. Yeah.
So I want to talk about the governmental, because I want to get to the leading to the discussion with developers and the owners and operators. But Philadelphia has the building tune-up regulations that just came out, and they've been pushed off for the requirement for the first tranche has been pushed off for a year due to COVID, which is completely understandable. New York City has the LO 97 and the other local laws. Chicago has laws, Seattle, so on and so forth. All of these things attacking urban areas, metropolitan, and we have a lot of customers that are looking to comply, and that's one of the things we do. We help them get to that point where they can start to see how do I get there? Okay, I can get there normal efficiency, and then I've got my other things that I'm going to have to do in order to get there. How are you guys seeing the government, specifically in the urban areas? Is there a big the government push on getting the buildings down, taking greenhouse gas out of the building population? Are you seeing that, and what kind of response are you seeing from the population? Either or, Allison, but me jump in.
Sure. So I'll start with that one. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are now 5 municipalities that have passed carbon emission caps. They don't all look like New York's. New York's is sort of unique in that there's sort of a sector-specific built-in carbon cost. I think it's $263 per ton. And I think, so it's the movement towards using governmental regulations to get folks to, reinvest in buildings that have carbon impacts, I think has happened. I think in some ways it's accelerated because of the lack of federal leadership in the past 4 years. And I think there's a lot of work that was done by states and localities to step in because they realized that they were the only game in town. I don't think that motivation is going anywhere simply because we have had a change of administration and a change of direction in DC. I think if anything, folks are realizing that any investment they've made at the local and state government level can only be better for their constituents now that more federal resources can be unlocked. So this is, I really think that this is a moment where the momentum is heading in that direction, from a resource perspective, and I think we're going to just keep hopefully accelerating.
Allison, comments?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with everything that Bomi said. It brought to mind some of the changes that we've been seeing around utilities and counties or cities saying that we're going to need to transition to all electric buildings rather than having gas buildings, and how that fits into sort of the national conversation and larger geographic conversations around where do gas lines travel for, and how are we going to make the clean electricity that we want in order to power all of those buildings. It's a big jigsaw puzzle, but there's a lot of momentum in a multitude of sides around that. We are starting to look at buildings in New York City where we're doing them all electric. There was a sense that we could not rely on there being new gas service for a building. And what are some of the positive benefits of that, of which there are quite a few. And now that we have whether it's electric stovetop or you're going induction, like there are a lot of different options to move forward.
So beyond electric buildings, electrification, but beyond, looking at those things, what about, local scale community solar projects, rooftop solar, wind. What are you seeing as far as activity? Because we see a lot. We see a lot of rooftop solar. We see rooftops paying for themselves. We see a lot of interest in customers actually procuring green energy on the grid. Either we've got universities that are focused saying, I want to buy my energy from a known green prop, we help them get that line in. They're not actually buying the electrons don't actually line up, but they come off the grid, of course. We all know that. But the dedicated green source. What are you guys seeing there? What's the big push, and where are we headed, you think? Is it utility based, or is it individually? Is it distributed energy resources that are being created by the individual buildings? What do you think? Tommy?
Oh, yeah. So I can tell you that just, the speed that conversations are shifting is just really astounding, right? So I would tell you that just even a couple of years ago, I think that it was typical for me as a representative of an owner to look at that whole conversation and just be like, when my residents flick a light switch, I want the light to come on. And that's about as much as I want to think about utilities, right? And then basically Sandy happened, and NYCHA, for example, committed to providing 100% backup of all of the affected developments. And so all of a sudden we took this big step into thinking about utilities in a way that we hadn't before. And I think that just, basically since then, the picture has just gotten much more and more complicated, right? Because on the one hand, I think in the building sector, generally speaking, we have these sort of very long ingrained habits of thinking of ourselves as sort of price-taking customers, right? Most often we don't participate in rate cases. We don't have our local PSC as being on our high priority list of governmental organizations to track. Like we're just not really involved at the policymaking end of the utility sector. I think that as we talk more about grid integrated efficient buildings, all of that is going to change, because if you think about it in a really simplistic term, what we're doing by electrifying, and even just the consensus that electrifying is a way that we were going to decarbonize buildings has happened really fast, right? But what we're doing by electrifying is we're basically taking all of our carbon emissions that are building sector emissions, aside from the embodied carbon, and just chucking it over into the electricity sector, right? Mm-hmm. And so now I think we should be doing the same thing as far as how we think about value, right? So we should be looking at the electricity sector and being like, what value do we have over there? Not just how much can we save on our bill and what's our electric rate doing, and certainly how is it being distributed equitably, with to low-income residents, for example. But I think we really should be asking, like, well, what are the values over there that you all are trying to capture, and how do we get some of that as the building sector?
Excellent, Allison. I think I jumped on you there. You're getting ready to tell us what your thoughts are.
That was great. I loved hearing about that, and I can reiterate from my perspective as a developer owner of private housing and other. We started. I think the conversation 5 years ago was sort of like, should we do sub-metering or not? Like, will people pay their bill if it's coming from the landlord for electricity? To a point where now it's a very different conversation. But even just like that movement to like getting people to pay for their own electricity use and seeing how they then adjust their air conditioning bills because now they pay for it instead of the landlord, makes a big difference. And I think the more people are paying for their own electricity and sort of have that top of mind, the more they want to find the solutions that bring it down. I think for Sidewalk, like one of our chief concerns is affordable electrification. So we don't want to put everything over until chuck that over to the electricity side of the fence. I like that. And then have people sort of unable to do the things they're accustomed to doing that they need to do to pay their bills. It's one thing to say, like, we'll help you bring energy efficiency into your home. We'll remind you to unplug your Nintendo, your PlayStation, which actually takes up a lot of electricity when it's plugged in. But it's another thing for them to be counting their pennies and to realize like, oh, my refrigerator is costing me a lot and I can't quite manage it. So thinking through the ways of building out community solar or other sort of means of electrical production and transaction so that it can be more predictable for people so that they can have some control over their bills, whether that's through technology, turning off things when they're out of their homes automatically. There's a multitude, I think, of ways to approach that, and that's something that Sidewalk Labs has been working on, some with a pilot project in Ontario, helping people manage their electricity bills where electricity is produced by hydropower. The other thing that we have been hearing more about, and this is really for larger master planning projects, is what are the alternative sources aside from solar? So are we adjacent to a deep body of water, geothermal, sort of again, sort of EV charging or data center excess heat, like sort of trying to take into account like what are all of the ways that we can generate energy aside from solar. Although I have solar on the roof of my home where I'm sitting now, so I'm certainly a believer there.
I'm impressed. That's awesome. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, if I might jump in also, I just want to point out though that the base building still matters a lot, right? And I think as exciting as the new technology stuff is, and whether we're talking about renewables or whether we're talking about some of the demand shaping technologies, at the end of the day, the building itself is a system. And so, getting a low energy building built or retrofitted, if anything, just gives you more wiggle room to play with, right? So if we ever do move from thinking about our interaction with electric utilities as being one of consumers, buying, and you're just telling me the price. If we move away from that model, then the more flexibility, demand flexibility you can have access to by having a really efficient, high performance based building, the more value you can, derive from transactions.
And the more valuable the building is, the more value there is to the people in the building. There's more ability to increase rents. There's all kinds of statistics out there that you can go and pull. And I spent some time yesterday with our marketing director pulling that data, and in preparation for this and other things. But it's basically, it's astounding the increased efficiency of a building and the health of a building and running efficiently impacts it benefits the person in the building, the person using that building. And it's a very kind of an exciting thing, because as we drive down cost, we increase NOI, we increase value of building based on CapEx rates. And then there's this whole other thing, this whole social aspect, which brings us into the conversation around ESG and how the acting on the E, the supporting the employees with the social or in the environment, the environment people live in, and the governmental, all of that starting to work together. And we're all starting to see the vision of how that comes together. I wanted to add something here on that we've seen is really exciting is the cost of green energy and brown energy. It used to be brown was so much cheaper and green was so much you paid a premium. We actually saw last year within 1% in New England contracting with a customer, green energy was 1% more than brown energy on the grid. Absolutely fantastic. It was really a no-brainer for the customer. They said, I'll go green and put a plaque on my wall powered by green energy for 1% more. I'm doing that, and so that kind of thing is happening. It's very exciting as there's a whole lot of stuff going on. I see we are at 36 minutes and we were supposed to go at a maximum of 40. So I want to kind of close things out here, and I always, when I'm moderating, I leave with one last statement, one last thing that you want to leave us with that we didn't cover. So, Bomi, since you went first, I'll let Allison go first this time. So, Allison, what didn't we cover today that you want to talk about?
I think I want to reiterate something that I mentioned, I think, in my introduction, which is that I think the real focus that we need to have right now is to not sacrifice work around racial justice for climate justice, and that people use them a bit interchangeably, and I don't think that they always are. but really understanding the overall systems, whether it's the building system, the master planning system, the larger grid systems, like who's being impacted, how could we set it up differently going forward so that we can benefit more people.
Excellent. Bomi?
Yeah, and I think I agree with Allison, and I think that one of the places where climate justice really solidly intersects with real estate is in talking about housing quality, right? So I think right now we're moving into a time where there's just going to be a lot of change, right? There's going to be a lot of change across all of the sectors in the economy. And, you know, we're at a moment where I think it's appropriate for us to question whether we need to redefine what housing quality entails, given what we're able to do off the shelf with off-the-shelf tools and technology today, and maybe not sort of move from always questioning, well, what is the value of this next incremental thing that I should be doing? You know, that's a methodology that basically says I'm going to add up incremental costs. But if we're thinking about it from a perspective of, you know, there are moments in time when societally we decide that we need a different standard of housing, then we build those things into the cost and life goes on. So for example, when we decided, even in a really recent example, when we decided a few years ago that for fire safety reasons, all buildings in New York City 4 stories and taller needed to be sprinklered, right? There was, I'm sure, you know, a lot of discussion around that before that decision happened, but certainly once it happened, we then decided, okay, well, that's what we decided as an industry, and now we're just going to do it. So I would love to just think about what are other issues that are at or near that point where we just need to make a quality assessment and say this should be done.
Excellent, and I totally agree. And from a guy, you know, my one last thing, from somebody that you know, we're out there on the ground, we're with customers at their plant sites, we're doing the audits, we're figuring out how do we do this, and you know, the exciting thing is that it used to be there were only a few things that actually paid for themselves, and now we're seeing more and more things pay for themselves. More and more things have financing capabilities, your opportunity to get things done, and those folks that aren't doing anything are actually, they're losing money by not doing things. Like if you're not doing efficiency projects right now, you're probably losing money. You're not impacting your P&L. You're not getting things done that could make your business run better, make more money, which for me, that's what's exciting for me, being in this field for a long time, and seeing the activity that we're doing. And then the next level of technology that you talked about, what's that going to be? How do we incorporate that? How do we take that to the next level? And you know, all of us, I love your analogy around the sprinkler system, that you know, these, I'm sure that seemed like something that there's no freaking way that we're going to be able to do that. And now, you know, there's one over my head right here. So we're going to be doing things differently in the future. And so I appreciate your comments. With me today, Bomi Jung and Allison Novak, Daley Tipton. I've really appreciated the time that we've spent today. We're right at our 40-minute limit. I want to give the meeting back to AmTrust. We really appreciate AmTrust Title for sponsoring this event, giving us the platform, and taking the opportunity to allow us to share some thoughts. So my co-host today, I really appreciate it, and thank you so much. And AmTrust will turn it back over to you.